Personal Stories Chapter 16. What is it that we all have in common who see the Mandela effect? Well, you can go check out this video, and then you can listen to these stories sent in by real subscribers just like you. Story 1, Anon. Hi Jynx, just binge watched your channel and am certain for now that I'm being affected daily and have been affected with body changes. I have had that near-death experience and I do not consider myself stupid, and if I'm ignorant, it's only because I haven't learned those facts. I feel like I'm someone new right now. Since 2011, things have been happening. I've given too much credit to getting off of a long prescribed medication, a tranquilizer for my anxiety, while getting the dose really low. I've had health changes for better since doing this, but that is not all. My mental changes have been present to the point of the fact that I do not even know who I am, or who I ever was, or who I'm meant to be. I feel so much more open to the universe, to spirituality, to things beyond my control, and full of acceptance that was not there before. It's bewildering to discover that you don't know who you are yourself. I thought I was on some journey, but my body ailments really keep on bothering me, and I just feel like I want to live where my body belongs. That sounds weird. I'm in pain daily. I have a thyroid autoimmune, Hashimoto's. It's a familial disease. And when you have that, it can make you feel like you are really losing your mind because there's a very real chemical imbalance. They fixed it with meds and I felt like a new person. And I was not happy in my marriage or my life. Husband went to out-of-state job and I survived exactly 3 months before reconciling. When Fukushima had its earthquake, something inside of me knew the world had turned a bit wrong. I had other things on my mind. My son was facing open heart surgery and near death, another NDE for him. He made it. Strangely, I do not remember much other than he got out of the hospital. I moved to Arizona to be with my husband in 2012. I had an emotional upheaval, again not knowing who this person I had become was. I was always pretty surly because of my childhood and early adulthood. We moved back to California when the job was done. 9 months later, Arizona is a highly spiritual place for us natives. By 2015, I lost every one of my family members from my extended family that I had any feelings left for to death. It was like I was being left behind. I cried so much after my father passed in December 2015. It was such a hole in my soul that I felt him around me, smelled his cologne and his tobacco. Things I sat down would vanish. I would cry and turn back around, and there it would be. I always thought my father was just looking after me. I could not handle any of it. And this is the first time I actually got told by anyone I was too weak to handle it. I always have to come out as a strong survivor. I always have to make my point or case. I'm stubborn like that. But now I'm on my knees by this. I can handle the little changes like logos or historic video footage. I can handle feeling spirits around me. It's always been there. My kid finds it unnerving when I tell them to take care that, specifically I told my son this, who teaches surfing, and turned out he came about 4 feet away from a great white shark. My daughter calls and says, "Hey, guess what happened?" Or, you got fired? How did you know? I have no idea. Then my other child in a financial bind, I seem to already be expecting. It's all weird, and I would like to just even listen to other stories, even if I say nothing. But it might help me if I do talk. My late father's birthday is fast approaching on 7/15, and I have a migraine again. Just still in more of a grieving process on days that carried significance. Weird, my father became a totally different man as well. About the same time my life turned around, and come to think of it, he lived in Arizona and I was living there as well. Husband has a job out there for 9 months. Something happened in Arizona, I think, and I just remembered a whole bunch of other things, so I hope I can get this in soon. Thank you, Anon. Story 2, DBS. Published on July 3rd, 2016, people are acting subtly different as the veil between our realms and spiritual is removed. But is the quantum effect really a bad thing? Or is it another example of God's thoughts being higher than our thoughts? If the QE brings us deeper, closer dependence on Yahshua, then it's a good thing. If you're not seeing the things that we speak about, then you are likely not in the world, but of the world. This was my first attempt at getting my entire church congregation to begin to understand what is taking place. Most, including pastoral staff and leadership, are not prepared to understand or accept the things that are happening around the world. But it is my duty as a watchman to bring the sound alarm. DBS. Story 3, MC. I respect the way that you present the topic in a way that it doesn't really seem sensationalized. You're down to earth, and I empathize with that. I know you get tons of emails, so I'm keeping this short. My story is very similar to yours in terms of my awakening. If you end up sharing my experience, please do keep me anonymous. This happened about 9 months ago. I've been taking my 2-year-old son to soccer lessons at a rec center for almost a year. He was 3 when this happened. Same lesson every week, same location for a year. All moms know that with a newly potty-trained kid, you use the restroom right before your lessons begin, so that was our routine. Check in at the front desk and go to the restroom before soccer class. We used the same exact restroom every week for a year. One particular day, we entered the locker room and both started walking to where bathroom stalls were, only this time, they weren't there. I just stood there dumbfounded, so that a woman said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Embarrassed, I just said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the bathrooms." She politely pointed to a completely different direction to where I was standing. The location of the bathroom stalls just didn't make any sense anymore. It freaked me out so much that I haven't signed my son up for a soccer lesson since, and I haven't returned to that rec center. I have no idea what happened there or what's going on. So there you have it. I know it may seem small in the grand scale of things, but okay, the bathrooms were in a different location, so who cares, right? Did we enter an alternate reality? I have no idea. I can't have these conversations with anyone else. My husband just laughs at me and thinks I'm a wacko. I just keep it all to myself so that I'm not ridiculed. I am a breast cancer survivor of 8 years and have had 6 major surgeries and 2 children. I don't know if something has happened to me during any of those experiences. Oh goodness, I could go down a rabbit hole, as I'm sure you can too. Thanks, MC. Story 4KN. I just stumbled on your channel and the video about dissonance and how some people handle it differently. Well, I'm writing to say thank you. Everything about your video and your words appealed to me. I too am well educated in quantum physics and did my share of studying and research. I won't go on and on about the similarities of my story. I would like to share my story because I'm one of those that have no one to talk to about it. Well, I came across the effect back in early November. I woke up in the middle of the night severely ill to my stomach, which never happens. I stayed up and turned on YouTube, and that's when the first time I was hit with the knowledge came. A video that changed my view ever since. I was in shock, awe. I spent the next week doing research and learning about all the effects and the stuff people have found. The more I learned, the more it affected me, and I couldn't cope. Even though I spent my whole life delving into supernatural, the occult, or anything that was unnatural, I was caught off guard by this. I remember the man ran over by the tank, Mandela dying many years ago, etc. It was Bernstein for me that always got me most. I tried to talk to people, even doing social experiments on social media with friends and family, only to be made out to look crazy. Then for a while I thought I was going crazy. Was I making myself crazy? I couldn't make sense of any of this. I felt out of place in a world that was not my own. Multiple universes, parallel worlds, where was I? Even the human body's changed. In December, I had a bunch of accumulated time off saved up for work. I wasn't doing myself any good, so... In fact, for the first time in my life, I was being unproductive at work, so I took 2 weeks off during the holidays. Chill out, get my head straight. Instead, I did the exact opposite. I dove more into the effect, and then CERN, etc. I was a smoker. In perspective, I turned 34 in November. I started smoking when I was 14. I started smoking pot when I was 16. There is a point to me telling you this. So during my time off, I did nothing but smoke and smoke and smoke, and I couldn't sleep. I drank heavily, I couldn't cope. The more research I did, the more I would ingest and not sleep. The depression set in, and I found myself crying over all of this. All of this set in the last week of December. My lung collapsed while I was asleep. The effect almost killed me. I was in the hospital for a week. I'm glad to say I'm now 6 months smoke-free and sober, but the effects are no less alarming. I still don't feel in place. It's all very surreal. Only now I have no coping mechanism. I'm forced to deal with it, and I just don't know where I am. I've almost accepted it as fake, just to get over it, but my brain doesn't work that way. I can't let it go. Is there anything we can do? Parts of me want to stop this whole ordeal, and others want it to continue, to get even more twisted. I guess I'm just wanting to talk to someone, share, someone who wouldn't call me crazy or stupid. Sincerely, KN of Indiana. Story 5HS. I've just discovered your channel now that I've awakened, as it were, to the quantum or Mandela effect. To give you some background, which may or may not be important to what I'm going to relate concerning my experiences with the Mandela or quantum effect, I was born 3 months premature, and I'm totally blind, resulting from the fact that the doctors exposed me to too much oxygen after my retinas. Also, I almost died several times as a baby, including the time I was under anesthesia. My ears too ring from time to time. Furthermore, I have had experiences with precognition. For instance, a Facebook friend of mine lives in Iran. Before he even told me about his wife being pregnant with their second child, I simply knew she was pregnant, and there's no rational way I'd be able to convey that to anybody. How I came about that information. It is as well important for me to mention that fairly frequently I check in from time to time with my iPhone voiceover, the screen reader Apple developed for all of its computers and iDevices, and it will say something like 211 or 1211 or 411, just to give some examples. And I'm prone to anxiety and depression, and I have been suicidal 3 times in my life, although I'm definitely stable at current times. At this point, I need to explain how I became interested in the effect, aside from the fact that I love shows, books, YouTube channels, and what have you dealing with the paranormal. I do not know whether this was a time slip or what have you, but back in 2000, I had to complete my first internship for my bachelor degree in social work. I did my internship in Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind in Washington, D.C. For those who may not be aware, the Columbia Lighthouse is a nonprofit that assists those with visual impairments learn skills that they would need to live as independently as possible. Braille skills, computer skills, orientation, and mobility training, aka mobility training, which involves learning how to travel as much as possible without assistance, including what a white cane can do, cooking, job readiness skills, and so forth. One of my supervisors, Sandy, not her real name, had partial sight and was 28 years old, making her 3 years older than me. Well, she was visually impaired like me. She had partial sight, and she thought I might be interested in meeting a good friend of hers who was visually impaired and was a licensed clinical social worker. His name was Jeffrey. Again, not his real name. Anyway, Sandy arranged with Jeffrey for us to meet at a Chinese restaurant for lunch. During the meeting, I expressed to Jeffrey I was interested in attending graduate school and obtaining an MSW, a Master's in Social Work. Jeffrey made it clear to me that I was interested in pursuing a graduate degree in social work. It was essential that I keep my grades up, which leads me to the next part of what I was going to relate. Several years after meeting Jeffrey, I contacted him with email addresses that he'd provided me in 2000. I reminded him of how we met, and I asked him for advice on how to get the most from grad school if I were to enter a graduate program. When he replied to my email, he not only indicated that he didn't remember meeting me, which this wasn't necessarily a surprise, but he also claimed he hadn't seen Sandy, who was his good friend I remember since 1978. I was truly thrown for a loop because if he hadn't seen Sandy since 1978, that would have made her 6 years old and certainly not a working professional. I would have been 3 years old and definitely not in college, and Jeffrey would have been around 22 years old. Since I couldn't find a rational explanation for what Jeffrey had told me, I simply shoved it to the back of my mind. However, I continued to be bothered by this glitch in the Matrix experience, if you will, and believe it or not, I decided to research the Mandela effect after listening to a story Hell Freezer, one of my favorite YouTube narrators, narrated on his channel, which mentioned the Mandela effect. I was shocked by what I discovered. The biggest smoking gun for me was the Tank Boy incident. I clearly remember that during Tiananmen Square protests, a young man was run over by Chinese army tanks. Also, there are 2 other events that are clearly different on this timeline, and I'm saying this from a perspective of someone who's also loved history, partly due to my late mother who taught philosophy and government at college level and was truly a walking fountain of knowledge. First, I can tell you that the Statue of Liberty was never attacked by Germany in 1916 in my reality, nor did the Japanese attack the West Coast with bombs made from homemade weather balloons in the hope that they could create so much panic in the United States that our troops would be forced to abandon their campaign in the Pacific Theater, giving the Japanese the upper hand. Not only that, I had a weird thing happen to me beginning of this year, where my bank is concerned. I bank with a credit union called Apple Federal Credit Union, and a friend of mine happened to be driving around and discovered a branch of my bank that hadn't existed in my previous reality. It wasn't even listed as a location on the Apple Federal Credit Union app or Apple Federal Credit Union's website until this year. I needed quarters anyway, so we entered the bank. Both of us were thinking it's a new branch, so we asked how long this branch had been in existence, and the teller we spoke with said they'd always been around, which I knew wasn't the case, but I wasn't going to push the issue. I will conclude by saying that for much of my life, I would have told people if they'd asked me about my religious beliefs that I am a deist. That is, there was a God or higher power who created the universe or universes in the beginning and did not interact with his or her creation after it came into being. However, I'm now starting to wonder, due to what I've experienced with the Mandela effect, if there's a God after all who interacts with the universe and universes. For while science may explain some of what's going on, it can't explain all of this. Moreover, I'm convinced more than ever that we need to make the world a more positive place, and that whether we put out negative or positive energy, this also affects the universe and universes. I hope my story will help someone know that they're not alone if they've had similar experiences. HS. And HS, your story does just that. When we can look at others' stories and find value in them, that's when we'll finally see the cause of the effect. We are truth, and we are not alone.